Antique dealer Rebecca Martinez had attended hundreds of estate sales throughout her career in Boston, but the Victorian mansion on Beacon Hill promised something special. The Ashworth family had lived in the same house for over a century, and their descendants were finally clearing out generations of accumulated possessions. Among the dusty photograph albums and faded daguerreotypes, Rebecca discovered a particularly charming family portrait dated May 1913 in elegant script. The sepia-toned photograph showed what appeared to be a perfect family moment. A well-dressed couple seated in their parlor, the woman holding an infant in an elaborate christening gown, while two young children stood beside them in their Sunday finest. The composition was expertly crafted, clearly taken by a professional photographer. Behind the family, an ornate mahogany cabinet displayed fine china and crystal, its glass doors reflecting the scene with remarkable clarity for early 20th century photography. Everything about the image radiated prosperity and happiness, exactly the kind of nostalgic Americana that her customers cherished. Rebecca purchased several photograph collections, planning to research their provenance for her antique shop. The 1913 family portrait seemed like an easy sale. Such wholesome images from the pre-World War I era were increasingly popular among collectors seeking connections to simpler times. Back at her shop that evening, Rebecca began cataloging her purchases under bright LED lights. As she examined the family portrait more closely with her professional magnifying glass, she noticed something peculiar about the baby's reflection in the cabinet glass. The infant in the photograph appeared peaceful and content, but the reflection seemed different somehow. She adjusted her desk lamp and looked again. What she saw made her hands tremble and her breath catch in her throat. The discovery would soon unravel a century-old mystery that challenged everything the photograph seemed to represent. Rebecca spent the next morning examining the photograph under various lighting conditions and magnification levels. What she had discovered defied logical explanation. While the baby in the direct image appeared alive and alert, being held lovingly by its mother, the reflection in the cabinet glass told a different story entirely. The reflected baby appeared unnaturally, still, its tiny face bearing an expression that seemed almost vacant. More disturbing still, the reflection showed what appeared to be unusual positioning of the infant's limbs, rigid and unnatural in a way that contradicted the seemingly natural pose captured in the main photograph. Rebecca contacted her friend Dr. Patricia Williams, a historian specializing in early American photography and funeral customs. Patricia arrived within an hour, bringing professional photographic analysis equipment and decades of experience with historical images. Victorian and Edwardian photography often involved long exposure times, Patricia explained as she examined the image. Subjects had to remain perfectly still, which sometimes created unusual effects. However, as she studied the reflection more closely, her academic composure began to falter. "This is highly unusual," Patricia admitted. "The reflection shows details that don't match the main image. Look at the baby's eyes in the reflection. They appear closed, while the direct image shows them open. The positioning is completely different." They documented every detail with high-resolution scans, comparing the main image with its reflection pixel by pixel. The discrepancies were undeniable and deeply unsettling. Rebecca had stumbled upon what appeared to be photographic evidence of something the 1913 family had tried to conceal. Patricia's expression grew troubled as she shared her preliminary assessment. "Rebecca, I think you may have discovered what we call a memorial photograph. A post-mortem image disguised to look like the baby was alive, but the reflection accidentally preserved the truth." This possibility opened disturbing questions about the Ashworth family and what had really happened in their Beacon Hill mansion over a century ago. Dr. Patricia Williams returned the next day with research materials about Victorian and Edwardian memorial photography practices. This somber tradition, she explained, had been common when infant mortality rates were tragically high, and many families had no other photographs of deceased children. Memorial photography reached its peak between 1840 and 1920, Patricia said, spreading historical examples across Rebecca's desk. Photographers developed techniques to make deceased subjects appear lifelike, using stands to prop bodies upright, painting eyes onto closed lids, and positioning family members to create the illusion of life. The examples were heartbreaking. Families posed with deceased loved ones in natural-looking arrangements. Parents holding babies who would never grow up. Siblings gathered around brother or sister who had succumbed to diseases that modern medicine could easily treat. The reflection in your photograph suggests sophisticated staging, Patricia continued. The photographer likely used the main pose to create the illusion that the baby was alive and alert, but the cabinet glass accidentally captured the actual positioning, which appears consistent with post-mortem photography techniques. Rebecca felt a chill as she realized the implications. So this happy family portrait might actually be parents saying goodbye to their deceased child? It's entirely possible. The elaborate christening gown, the formal setting, the professional photography, all consistent with families who wanted one beautiful image to remember their lost child by. Patricia began researching the Ashworth family genealogy, looking for records of infant deaths around 1913. Meanwhile, Rebecca contacted the estate sale organizers, hoping to learn more about the family's history from surviving descendants. The photograph was transforming from a charming antique into a window into one family's profound grief, carefully concealed behind the practiced deceptions of memorial photography. The reflection in the cabinet glass had preserved the truth that the Ashworth family had worked so hard to hide, even from themselves. Rebecca's inquiry led to a meeting with Margaret Ashworth Thompson, the great-granddaughter of the family in the photograph. Margaret, now in her 70s, had organized the estate sale after her elderly aunt's passing and agreed to meet at a coffee shop near the Boston Common. "I remember my grandmother showing me that photograph when I was young," Margaret said, studying the image with sad recognition. "She always spoke of it as the last picture of baby William before he passed away." Margaret's voice caught as she continued. "Grandmother never said much about William's death, just that it happened very suddenly in the spring of 1913. She said my great-grandmother Elizabeth never fully recovered from the loss." According to family oral history, William had been Elizabeth Ashworth's third child and first son. The family had been thriving. Robert Ashworth owned a successful shipping business, and they were prominent members of Boston society. William's birth had been celebrated as securing the family legacy. Grandmother mentioned that Elizabeth became obsessed with having the perfect photograph of William, Margaret explained. She hired the most expensive photographer in Boston and spent weeks planning every detail. But then William became ill with what they called summer complaint, probably what we'd now recognize as severe gastroenteritis or dysentery. The timing aligned perfectly with the photograph's date. Margaret pulled out a small leather journal that had belonged to her great-great-grandmother. Elizabeth kept this diary. The entries around William's death are heartbreaking. The diary entries from May 1913 revealed a mother's desperate grief and her determination to create one beautiful memory of her lost son. Elizabeth had written, "The photographer assured me William would appear as if merely sleeping peacefully in my arms. No one will ever know our beautiful boy had already gone to God." The reflection in the cabinet glass had inadvertently preserved the reality Elizabeth Ashworth had tried so hard to transform. Patricia's research into 1913 Boston photographers led them to the archives of Whitman and Associates, one of the city's most prestigious photographic studios. The company had specialized in both society portraits and memorial photography, serving Boston's wealthy families during an era when such services were essential but rarely discussed openly. The studio's client ledgers, preserved at the Boston Public Library's archives, contained detailed records of the Ashworth family commission. The entry, dated May 15, 1913, listed unusual specifications: memorial portrait, infant subject, family grouping, emphasis on natural positioning and lighting, extra care required for discretion and sensitivity. More revealing were the technical notes left by the photographer, Harrison Whitman himself. His meticulous records described the challenges of creating a convincing illusion of life. Positioning supports placed carefully out of camera view. Infant's eyes painted open post-exposure using standard memorial techniques. Family instructed to maintain natural expressions throughout extended exposure time. Whitman had noted the cabinet placement specifically, reflective surfaces minimized in composition, though mahogany cabinet glass unavoidable due to client preferences for familiar setting. This casual observation proved crucial. Whitman had recognized the potential problem, but hadn't anticipated how clearly the reflection would preserve the actual scene. Dr. Williams found additional correspondence between Whitman and other photographers of the era, discussing the ethical complexities of memorial photography. Many families struggle with accepting their loss. Whitman had written to a colleague, "Our role is to provide comfort through artistry, helping them preserve dignity in their darkest moments." The letters revealed that Whitman considered himself not just a photographer, but a grief counselor, helping families process loss through carefully constructed visual narratives. The Ashworth Commission had been particularly challenging because Elizabeth insisted on absolute realism. She wanted no obvious signs that William had died. This context transformed the photograph from deception into compassionate artistry. Though the cabinet reflection had preserved the truth, Whitman tried so skillfully to transform. Margaret shared more of Elizabeth Ashworth's diary entries, revealing the depth of a mother's grief and her desperate attempts to maintain normalcy after William's death. The entries painted a portrait of a woman struggling to reconcile social expectations with overwhelming personal loss. June 2, 1913. The photograph arrived today. Mr. Whitman has worked a miracle. William appears so peaceful, so perfect. When visitors see it, they comment on what a beautiful, healthy baby he was. I smile and agree, though my heart breaks with each compliment. Elizabeth had displayed the photograph prominently in their parlor, where it became a centerpiece of the family's social life. Guests would admire the lovely family portrait, never suspecting they were viewing a memorial image. This deception allowed Elizabeth to speak of William as if he were simply sleeping elsewhere in the house. June 15, 1913, Mrs. Harrison asked about William during tea today. I found myself describing his recent growth and development as if he were upstairs in the nursery. The photograph makes such conversations possible. It preserves the illusion that our family remains complete. The diary revealed that Robert Ashworth had been more accepting of their loss, wanting to put away reminders and move forward. However, Elizabeth couldn't bear to acknowledge William's death publicly, fearing the pity and changed social dynamics that would follow. July 4, 1913. Robert grows concerned about my attachment to the photograph. He says I speak of William as if he were still with us. Perhaps he is right, but the portrait allows me to maintain the fiction that our happiness was not destroyed by God's cruel whim. As months passed, Elizabeth's entries became increasingly detached from reality. She began planning William's first birthday celebration and shopping for clothes he would never wear. The photograph had become both a source of comfort and a barrier to healthy grieving. Margaret looked visibly affected as she read these passages. My grandmother always said that Elizabeth never fully recovered from William's death. She lived in a kind of fantasy where he was still alive. As Elizabeth's mental state deteriorated, the Ashworth family faced a dilemma that reflected the social pressures and medical understanding of 1913. Robert Ashworth's business correspondence, preserved in the Boston Maritime Museum archives, revealed his growing concern about his wife's condition and its potential impact on their social standing. In letters to his business partner, Robert described Elizabeth's behavior with increasing worry. Elizabeth continues to speak of William as if he were thriving upstairs. Yesterday, she set a place for him at dinner and became agitated when I suggested removing it. Our friends are beginning to notice her peculiarities. Dr. Williams found medical records from Dr. Samuel Morton, the family's physician, who had attended William's birth and death. His notes described Elizabeth's condition using the limited psychological terminology available in 1913. Patient exhibits signs of melancholia with delusions, refuses to acknowledge infant's demise, maintains elaborate fantasies about child's continued existence, recommend discreet family management to avoid institutional commitment. The social stigma surrounding mental health in 1913 meant that families like the Ashworths had few options beyond concealment. Robert hired additional household staff to manage Elizabeth's care while maintaining appearances in Boston society. The photograph played a central role in this careful deception. Margaret discovered letters from Elizabeth's sister, who had visited from New York during the crisis. Elizabeth showed me around the house as if William were napping in each room she mentioned. The photograph sits prominently displayed and she speaks of it as if taken yesterday. Robert looks exhausted from maintaining this pretense, but fears the scandal of admitting Elizabeth's condition. The family's other children, 7-year-old Caroline and 5-year-old James, visible in the photograph, were coached to support their mother's fantasy when visitors were present. This collective deception allowed Elizabeth to avoid institutionalization, but trapped the entire family in an elaborate fiction. The photograph's reflection had inadvertently preserved evidence of the moment when the Ashworth family began living a lie that would define their lives for years to come. By late 1913, maintaining Elizabeth's delusion became increasingly difficult. Her diary entries from this period revealed a woman caught between fantasy and painful reality, with the photograph serving as both anchor and torment. October 12, 1913. I caught myself staring at the photograph for hours today. Sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I see movement in the cabinet glass, as if William were trying to tell me something. Robert says I am imagining things, but I know my son's spirit lives within that image. Elizabeth had begun to notice discrepancies between the main photograph and the reflection, though she interpreted them through the lens of her grief rather than recognizing the truth about memorial photography techniques. Margaret found correspondence from Carolyn Ashworth, Elizabeth's daughter, written years later to a cousin. Mother became convinced that William was somehow trapped in the photograph, trying to communicate with her through the reflection. She would spend entire afternoons talking to the image, waiting for responses that never came. The situation reached a crisis in December 1913 when Elizabeth suffered what Dr. Morton described as a complete nervous collapse during a Christmas party. She had been explaining to guests how William was growing and developing, using the photograph as evidence, when she suddenly broke down and began screaming about the truth in the mirror. Robert was forced to reveal William's death to their social circle and seek more intensive treatment for Elizabeth. She spent several months at a private sanitarium outside Boston, where doctors slowly helped her process her grief and accept reality. March 1914. I am beginning to remember what really happened to my dear William. The doctors say that grief can make the mind play tricks, can make us see what we desperately wish were true. The photograph was my way of keeping him alive, but now I understand it also kept me from saying goodbye. When Elizabeth returned home, she asked Robert to put the photograph away. However, according to family records, she never fully recovered, her previous vitality remaining withdrawn and melancholy for the rest of her life. Dr. Williams's continued research into Harrison Whitman's archives revealed a troubling epilogue to the Ashworth Commission. In a letter to his professional association dated January 1914, Whitman expressed deep regret about his role in enabling Elizabeth's psychological deterioration. The Ashworth memorial photograph was technically successful but ethically questionable, Whitman wrote. Mrs. Ashworth's insistence on absolute realism created an image so convincing that she began to believe her own fiction. I fear my artistry contributed to her mental anguish rather than providing comfort. Whitman had learned of Elizabeth's breakdown through Boston's social networks and felt responsible for creating a photograph that was too effective in concealing death. He began advocating for more obvious memorial photography techniques that honored the deceased while clearly acknowledging their passing. His later correspondence revealed the technical details of how the cabinet reflection had preserved the truth. The mahogany glass captured the actual positioning before I arranged the final illusion. I should have noticed this discrepancy during composition, but the family's urgency and my focus on the main image caused me to overlook this crucial detail. Whitman's guilt led him to change his memorial photography practices, incorporating subtle but clear indicators that helped families process grief more healthily. He also began refusing commissions that involved extensive deception about death, believing that such images hindered rather than helped the grieving process. Rebecca found a final letter from Whitman to Robert Ashworth, written in 1920. I have followed your family's story with concern over these years. Please know that I deeply regret any role my photograph played in prolonging Mrs. Ashworth's anguish. Sometimes the most compassionate art can become a cruel trap when it succeeds too completely. This professional acknowledgement validated what the reflection had preserved, evidence that the photograph was simultaneously a masterpiece of memorial artistry and a document of a family's desperate denial of loss. The discovery of the Ashworth family's story through the photograph's reflection sparked important conversations about historical trauma, grief, and the role of memorial photography in American culture. Rebecca donated the image to the Boston Dew Historical Society, where it became part of an exhibit on hidden stories and family photographs. Margaret Ashworth Thompson worked with historians to compile a complete record of her family's experience, contributing to scholarly understanding of how early 20th century families coped with infant mortality and mental health crises. Elizabeth's diary and the photographer's correspondence became valuable primary sources for researchers studying historical grief practices. Dr. Williams published her findings in the Journal of American Cultural History, emphasizing how the photograph's reflection had preserved evidence of both artistic technique and human tragedy. The image became a teaching tool for students learning about the intersection of technology, art, and social history. This single photograph contains multiple truths, Williams wrote. The main image shows what the family wanted to remember and what society expected to see. The reflection preserves what actually happened and reveals the techniques used to create comforting illusions. Together, they document both individual grief and cultural practices surrounding death in 1913 America. The exhibit drew visitors who shared their own family stories about hidden grief and memorial photographs. Many discovered similar images in their own collections, leading to greater understanding of ancestors' experiences with loss and trauma. Rebecca kept detailed records of the photograph's provenance and impact, ensuring that William Ashworth's brief life and his family's struggle to cope with his death would be remembered with compassion and historical accuracy. The cabinet reflection that once threatened to expose a family secret had ultimately become a window into authentic human experience. Margaret concluded her family's story with reflection. My great-great-grandmother Elizabeth loved William so much that she couldn't let him go, even after death. The photograph allowed her to maintain that love, even if it came at a terrible cost. Now, more than a century later, both William and Elizabeth can finally